What's going on? Just making some tea here. Got some chai tea. Gonna answer a few questions today. I get questions a lot via YouTube comments, which is fantastic because you're watching this on YouTube and that's great. So if you have a question, feel free to ask on any video that I publish. I usually will see it. I won't be able to necessarily reply back to each of them, but I will try to answer a lot of the questions that we see. So today, the questions that we're gonna look at are about taxes. People ask about taxes pretty often, and someone sent in a question, George, so I'm gonna go over that. Consult your CPA, of course, I am not an expert. I'm looking at the questions right now. Michael asked this. He says that he found a keyword that has 720 searches per month with only 9 all in title, and he's thinking, should I go for it? It doesn't quite fit the keyword golden ratio formula, but should I go for it? So I'll talk about that. And finally, Emanual asks about embedding YouTube videos and the speed cost that it has by embedding. So he's worried about page load time. So those are the 3 questions we're gonna look at today. First off, let's get into taxes. So George sent this in and he was wondering, he's starting to make some money, by the way. He's starting to make some money and he's wondering, like, what do you have to do for taxes? He was asking if I do my own taxes. He asked about a recommendation for a CPA, an accountant who is familiar with online business and that sort of thing. So number 1, you have to pay taxes. All right. So I don't know where you live, but I live in the US, but generally you have to pay taxes. You can get away with all sorts of stuff, but you can't get away with not paying your taxes. So that, my friends, is super important. So when you start earning money online, you should probably sock away about 30 to 40% of it. I mean, you will have to pay taxes at some point. Now, if you happen to be overpaying throughout the year with your full-time gig or something like that, maybe it's not going to be a big deal, but it's very good for you to get into the habit of saving about 1/3 or so of the revenue coming in to pay for taxes. Depending on the state that you live in, and I'm going to backtrack, consult an accountant, talk to an expert. I am not an expert. Don't listen to what I say. I'm only telling you my own personal experience. So that said, you have to pay federal taxes. Depending on the state that you live in, you may have to pay state income taxes as well. The states that I have lived in, I did have to pay state income tax. So keep that in mind. There are some other states. I think there's a handful. You could easily Google this, but I am uninformed, so don't listen to me. Pretty sure Florida, Texas, I think Wyoming, and maybe a couple other states don't have income taxes. So in those cases, you wouldn't have to pay the state income tax. You still have to pay the federal income tax, but a lot of times the state income tax is, is under 10%, but it's still something to think about. Anyway, the grand conclusion when I answered George, because he was like, hey, do you have an accountant that you could recommend, stuff like that. It doesn't really matter like what your business is. So if your accountant doesn't know affiliate marketing or internet marketing or online business or whatever, it really doesn't matter. It's a side business that you're making some money on, and it will just count as income on your income taxes, right? So it'll just be income that you add in there that you will have to pay taxes on. And there wasn't any, withholding done like formally. So the withholding needs to be done by you. And it's really nice if you put it aside, like as you're earning it. So that said, I recommend socking away 30, 40%. If you're in another country, do whatever is customary there for taxes. I have heard through the grapevine of some countries where, basically they're not paying taxes at all because of the way the money is coming in, and they're not paying any taxes, which is huge, right? If you happen to be in one of those places, do whatever it is you're supposed to do. Always consult a professional, all right? Always consult a professional. One thing I'll note is one of the recent interviews, the second interview I did with Evan, he and I talk about forming a company, how to, set up your company so you could file taxes as an S Corp with IRS, and just kind of deep into the weeds of setting up a company, saving a little bit of money. So when you're doing payroll and all these buzzwords, blah, 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 like it's a little bit complicated to set up, but once you do, you actually do save some money. I'll also mention a couple times I have talked about paying taxes before, and people pointed out, hey Doug, I think you're doing something wrong, because as a business you should be able to, write it off. As Cosmo Kramer says, just write it off. If you're making income, like, I'm pretty sure there's some things you could do to save a little bit of money, but in general, if you're making income, you're going to have to pay taxes. I don't know of any like loopholes that really get you out of it. You can shuffle some money around, but at the end of the day, you're probably going to have to pay taxes on it. If not now, you will in the future. So I'll get off my high horse there. Consult a professional, you got to pay taxes. The next question from Michael is around keywords that don't quite fit the keyword golden ratio. His example was 720 searches per month and an all-in title of 9. So it's a very good ratio, but it doesn't fit the under 250 local monthly searches that is part of the formula. So the answer is, Michael, yeah, go for it, man. Go for it. There's a couple things that I need to mention. So number one, that is a fine ratio, even though it is not part of the keyword golden ratio. So I would go for it. In most cases, if someone asks a question like this, I found a keyword and it seems really good. Should I go for it? My answer, 99% of the time, is yes. Go for it. It's probably going to be fine. You'll learn something at the end of the day. You will learn something, either it's going to work or it's not going to work, and it's a data point that you have found on your own versus someone else telling you, like me, or someone who even has maybe less experience than me. The point is, you should try it. There's no harm in trying it other than the time it takes you to publish the article, maybe pay for the article to be written, or writing it yourself. So it's a pretty low cost of entry to get actual real results from your own website, from something that you found. So give it a shot. The worst case scenario is that it doesn't work, and then you now have a data point. It doesn't mean that it's never gonna work, but it just means in that instance, it didn't work. Now, what I don't recommend, because every now and then this question comes in a different form. So let's say someone finds a keyword that has 5,000 searches per month and the all-in title is 9. Well, I would recommend, sure, again, go for it. You will then have your data point. However, I don't recommend that you always do these exception edge cases. If you keep checking all these cases in testing and going through and following through on these edge cases that don't fit the formula, maybe they have too many searches, maybe they have 0 searches, I wouldn't do a large percentage of these edge cases. You want most of your content, or whatever it is you're doing, you want most of like your activities to be in the sweet spot. That's what the keyword golden ratio is about. So that's point number one this question like draws out of me. Now, point number 2 is you don't have to publish keyword golden ratio content. So I have been observing a lot of questions coming to me where people are saying, well, I'm not doing all keyword golden ratio content, thinking that I was going to be upset. Well, I don't either. I mean, I talk about the KGR a lot because it's what a marketer is supposed to do, and a lot of people ask questions about it. And I spent a lot of time just convincing people that it was a thing that you should check out. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, maybe you can get some insight by looking at those kind of keywords. Now, I have a lot of other keywords that I go for. So the KGR is just a piece of the formula, piece of the puzzle as you're growing a site or doing keyword research on any type of site. So don't think for one second that I'm only doing KGR content. It's just it's a piece of the puzzle that we're working with. It's a big piece of the puzzle that you can do a lot with, and it's a great way to get started and then, figure out where you want to spend your time. But you should go for this keyword, Michael. Know that you can go for other keywords that are not KGR compliant, and I would give that advice to everyone. It's just a piece of the puzzle here. All right, last question in from Emanual. Thank you for sending it in via a YouTube comment. Don't forget, everyone, you can ask your own questions in YouTube comments, so please leave comments. To the question at hand, basically, whenever you embed a YouTube video from the code that YouTube gives you, by the way, there's no issues with that. There's no copyright problems. You can embed videos from YouTube. It is fine. So you just snag the code that YouTube gives you, and that code calls YouTube, and every call that your site makes slightly delays the load time. It may or may not be significant, but Emmanuel's right. It does slow things down. And in fact, if you happen to have a page on your site or post where you have several YouTube videos embedded and you check the load time, you will see that it does indeed take some time. It pulls down the thumbnail and stuff like that. So if you have one video and you're embedding, probably not a huge deal, all right? I think if you have multiple videos, that can slow things down a bit. But here's where it gets a little interesting, right? You probably have to look at your overall site load time. So if your site loads really fast, you have good hosting, you have, a fast theme, and then you also have like a small number of plugins and just a fast, lean site that loads quickly. If you have a couple YouTube embeds on a post, it's probably not going to be the worst thing in the world. However, like most things, it's a compound effect from all the things, right? So if you have a slightly slow host, if you have a slightly slow theme, maybe you have a couple plugins that you don't really need, and maybe they're a little bit slow. All those things will slow down your site a bit. And then if you throw a YouTube embed in there, well, that's going to slow things down a little bit more. And you're going to end up with a site that loads in 4 seconds or more, or 3 seconds or more, something a little bit slow. And I'll tell you a couple quick tips. I'm going to have to do like a longer video on this idea, but I got a little bit obsessed with mobile loading and using I think it was the Google Page Speed Insights, PSI, Page Speed Insights, to check my mobile loading score. Now, say what you will about the validity of what Google is telling you in that tool, but at least it gives you a benchmark. I think you can get some good insights from it, even if you don't agree with everything exactly. So I found that a few of my sites were fine on the desktop side. They had a score of, 98 to 100 on the desktop loading speed. My mobile speed was 23, 24. It was something in the low 20s, and I realized, well, I should probably do something about that. So I studied up a little bit. I installed a couple plugins to help optimize where things were loaded. For example, I used a lazy load plugin. I think it was called the A3 lazy load. There's several out there. You could probably pick one that you want to test and then see how you like the way it works and all that sort of thing. So I installed a couple plugins. I removed a few plugins that I realized I didn't need. So I tell people this all the time, to try and figure out which plugins you can get rid of, really figure out if you need it or not. So I went through that exercise, removed 3 or 4 plugins, and then I installed some of these optimizing type plugins. So basically your site loads a little bit faster, it delays some things, like the YouTube embeds, which is how I'm tying this together. That lazy load plugin allows the YouTube embeds to load after the critical stuff on your page, right? So it just makes everything load faster. Anyway, I was able to, through this one-day obsession, a little OCD kicked in, and I guess I didn't have too much on my to-do list, and eventually I got my site load time down to about a second or less for most average pages. And my mobile PSI score, most of the time it got up into the high 70s, and a couple of pages were in the 90s. So I was like, that's obviously a huge increase from the 20s all the way up to the 90s. And at that point I was like, all right, things are loading faster. There's some easy stuff to do, right? Make sure you have small images and all that stuff. But to Emanual's point, if you embed a video, it'll slow the load time down just a little bit, but really you have to look at your overall site. Check your homepage, which is interesting as far as the load time, but you should also check your highest traffic page, an average page with an average number of images, because a lot of times your homepage is going to be not an average page. It is a little bit different than all the other pages on your site, most likely. Most likely it will be. All right, thanks again to everyone for checking this out. If you want to ask some questions, you could do it on YouTube comments. I really like that. I didn't mention it before, but my name's Doug Cunnington, and you could check out some of my other videos. And if you like them, you should subscribe. And if you happen to like podcasts, I have a podcast called The Doug Show, and you could find it on most of the directories out there, or you can go to doug.show. Got a cool domain name, doug.show. That's it, and then there are links to subscribe there. There are many episodes out there already, and I encourage you to check it out. Thanks.